Hello, I'm Annie Graham Larkin, Executive Director of the Bisbee Mining and Historical Museum. Welcome to From the Balkans to Bisbee, the South Slav Odyssey with historian Mike Anderson. Thank you to our members and donors who enable the museum to provide free online programming and fulfill the organization's mission to discover history, explore Bisbee's past today. To learn how you can assist the museum in supporting its mission and programs by becoming a member or donor, please visit bisbeemuseum.org. During December, the Bisbee Mining and Historical Museum is celebrating turquoise. On Friday, December 12th and Saturday, December 13th, from 10 a.m. until 4 p.m. each day, the museum will host a turquoise jewelry show and sale. The sale will offer one-of-a-kind antique Native American jewelry, ranging from earrings to squash blossoms. Don't miss this opportunity to find a unique holiday gift for someone special in your life or treat yourself to an exceptional piece of jewelry. In addition to the turquoise jewelry show and sale, on Saturday, December 13th at 11 a.m., the museum will host the free online program Unraveling the Secrets of Bisbee's Famous Turquoise Occurrence with Dr. Mark Pekka. To register or for more information, visit the Bisbee Mining and Historical Museum's Facebook page. And lastly, if you have not yet, be sure to visit the museum's temporary exhibit, See You in Turquoise, Celebrating the Stone of the Southwest. The exhibit features a fine selection of turquoise jewelry from famous mining localities. This exhibit is included with regular admission to the museum. Okay. Longtime Bisbee resident Mike Anderson is the author of Warren Ballpark, a work that delves into the rich history of the playing field. He is also the historian and founding member of the Friends of the Warren Ballpark in Bisbee. And in addition to his work, Warren Ballpark, Anderson's historical research has been featured in numerous journals and articles. If you would like to ask a question during the program today, please type your question into our Q&A chat box, and we'll gather those to share with Mike after the presentation. Also, a link to today's recording will be sent to all of our Zoom registrants later today. And with that, welcome, Mr. Anderson.
Thank you very much, Annie, and thank you for all the folks who kindly have given up part of their Saturday to listen to me talk. This has been a fascinating research project, and we all know folks from Bisbee who are members of the South Slavic community, and some of us have had friendships or just knew people from their position in the community. But until I started diving into this, I had no idea how much of a contribution the South Slav immigrant community made to the Warren Mining District in the early days and continued making contributions for many, many years. So we're going to take a look at what folks did, how they got here, why they came here, what they did after they got here, and how their legacy continues on in many, many different ways. The photo you see in the beginning here is of the Croatian Benevolent Society in Bisbee. This was taken at the old Copper Queen Hospital in Lowell. And all of the South Slav immigrant communities, and that includes the Montenegrins, Serbs, Croatians, and Slovenes, all had strong identities as a result of having organizations and customs and traditions that went back for hundreds of years in the Balkans that they brought over to here. So to get an idea of why people came to Bisbee from the Balkans, first of all, let's take a look at geography and a little bit of political history. The Balkans, of course, are a peninsula that's located between the Black Sea and the Adriatic Sea and consists basically of countries of Slavic people and also Greeks and Austrians. And in 1914, this is the political map. This was at the time of the war, but this map pretty much holds up for years leading up to World War I as well. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, and that's right here in the yellow, controlled much of what is today um, Serbia and Montenegro and the other Balkan states. And in 1914, Serbia was an independent country, Montenegro was an independent country, and um, other parts of the Austro-Hungarian Empire included Montenegrins and ethnic Serbs and ethnic Croatians and ethnic Slovenes. So this is the gateway to Europe between Asia coming through Asia Minor, coming through Turkey, coming from Russia. And so this area was fought over for hundreds of years. There were constant invasions by different groups of people. The Slavs themselves invaded the area early on during the time of the Roman Empire, and the Ottomans, Turks came in the 1300s and occupied much of what is today the Balkans. So it's important to recognize that Serbia and the Serbs, the Montenegrins, who are very, very close relations to the Serbs in terms of language and customs, the Croatians, were all occupied for hundreds of years. And because of that, in order to maintain their identity, they had to establish strong traditions, strong cultures, strong social relationships that could um, keep them from being dominated by the occupying cultures. And over here, you can see where they came from. The Serbs, located here, Croatians, that's the light blue. The Croatians are um, this salmon color here. And what's interesting is that there's no just solid block. They're kind of interspersed with each other. And Slovenes were up here. So everybody's pretty much scattered about. And on top of them, of course, are the occupying Ottoman Turks for many, many years, and later the Austrians. So it's a mishmash, and that created a lot of culture, a lot of tensions and warfare for many, many years. But by the 1914, the Serbians had established their own independent country. Montenegro had an independent country. Croatia was still occupied by the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So why do people leave home? Why come to the United States? Well, there were a lot of different reasons, and I think we touched on war, political, and ethnic strife, which continues today to a certain extent. We saw that in the 1990s into the early part of the 20th century. Another reason, that's one reason why people leave. We call that pushing dynamic. Another pushing or pulling dynamic was improved economic conditions in the United States. If there is an economic downturn in the Balkans, but things are good in the United States and people have job opportunities and opportunities for self-advancement by starting businesses, then that increases the likelihood that they are to come here. They also came here to connect with family members who had already immigrated. And one of the most important elements of Balkan cultures, whether it was Serbs, Montenegrins, Croatians, or Slovenes, was that they maintained very strong family ties. And you see the same thing in a lot of ethnic groups that emigrated to the United States in the late 19th and early 20th century. That Chinese, Jewish immigrants, Italian immigrants, immigrant populations from just about everywhere tried to bring as much of their culture with them as they possibly could, but they also tried to maintain family relationships. So if one person immigrated, for example, to Bisbee, then they would write back home and say, yep, they don't speak our language and they may have some funny customs over here, but things are actually pretty good, and we don't have to worry about being stepped on by the Turks or the Austrians. So come on over. And that's what happened. It was chain migration. The chain migration resulted in more and more people coming to the United States from various locations, including the Balkans. So why do people go back? And what one of the surprising things to me that I learned was that there were a number of people who did return to the Balkans as a result of um, changing in economic conditions. So we had a depression here after World War I in the 1930s, and for that reason, a lot of the where some of the people who immigrated to the United States returned to the Balkans, in that case, back to Yugoslavia, which was a country created after the end of World War I. Homesickness and a desire to reconnect with families was a big motivation as well. And patriotism. A lot of the immigrants who came to Bisbee in the early part of the first decade of in the beginning of the second decade of the 20th century returned to fight the Turks uh, and to fight other Balkan ethnic groups in the Balkan Wars. So you've got sort of a push and a pull dynamic going on that brings people over here and also motivates them to return. So, who were some of the earliest South Slavs to immigrate to Cochise County? One of them was Vaso Medvedevic, and he came here originally from Virginia City. And he had gone to Carson City to work for his cousin Nick Medvedevic in the early 1880s. And he came to Bisbee came to Tombstone in 1885. Excuse me. Yeah, came to Tombstone in 1885. And he opened up a grocery store and then expanded moved to Bisbee and established the Palace grocery store and saloon on the corner of Howell and Brewery Avenue. And those buildings the Medvedevic Building 1 and 2 in Brewery Gulch still exist today. One of those buildings is now going to be the Cafe Le Cornucopia very soon when it opens back up. It was a Mexican restaurant, of course, before that. So Vaso, who was a fairly well-educated person, and the early Serbs to immigrate to Bisbee were people that had already had some success either in previous businesses after immigrating to the United States, for example, Vaso in Virginia City, and so they were pretty well off. And he went back after he made money to marry Eva Sujic, and he brought her back. And Eva was also pretty well educated person. Both of them stressed education, and what they did was when they had their 4 children, George, Minnie, Milan, and Dusan, all 4 of them attended Ivy League schools on the East Coast or prestigious universities on the West Coast. So George became a senior executive for Firestone Tire. Minnie became a teacher and a sociologist. Milan became a lawyer, and one of his clients was Winnie Ruth Judd, the trunk murderess. And Dusan became a prestigious dermatologist in Phoenix. They were very successful in their businesses, made a lot of money, but they moved to Southern California in the early 1920s. And Vaso died there in 1929. And this is a picture of Eva in front of the Medvedevic building on Brewery Avenue in Bisbee in the early part of the 20th century. So Vaso was a very successful businessman. Another South Slav to come to Bisbee early on was John Angus. And he left Montenegro to join his cousin in Virginia City, Nevada. The Angus family and the Medvedevic families were related by marriage. And again, we see those connections, those family connections and community connections that continued on after they emigrated to the United States. And these are very good for helping people pool resources, to have labor for their businesses. And again, these are very much like other ethnic groups that immigrated to the United States. So John first came to Tombstone after he left Virginia City, Nevada. And the way that merchants like this worked was that instead of working in mines, they mined the pockets of miners. And when one mining community would start to decline because the mines weren't producing much anymore, they'd move on to the next. And that's what John Angus did in the 1880s, moved to Tombstone, opened a grocery store. And then he went back to the Balkans, brought Nastasia Stane with him, Medvedevic back to him. So he married into the Medvedevic family and brought her back with him to Bisbee. They operated a grocery store and hotel on Main Street in Bisbee for years. And he was very active in community affairs. He was a member of Bisbee's first city council in 1902. The family built a lovely home, which still exists on Angus Avenue, right just across the street from the Warner Hotel. Beautiful home. And he died in 1904, very suddenly. And his family continued to live in Bisbee. One of his sons, Dan Angus, became a state senator. This was a prosperous family. These people were well educated as well as the Menegovich family was. And they made their mark in Bisbee, and there are still strong evidence of their existence here today. Now, these were prosperous merchants. There were very, very, very few other South Slavs in Bisbee until the last few years of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century. The reason for that was that they were not considered by Phelps Dodge to be white and therefore couldn't work underground. But when the Angus and Menegovich families demonstrated to folks back in the Balkans that, hey, there's great opportunities here and it's a good place to live, you started seeing people start to come in. One reason why they were employed in the mines was that at the same time that they were starting to immigrate over here, Calumet and Arizona Mining Company and the Lowland Arizona Mining Company established new mining operations to the east of the original mines, which were just located right next to Old Bisbee. The Calumet in Arizona was owned by people from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan who had successfully used South Slav miners in the UP and had no compunctions about hiring them as miners in Bisbee. The wife of Maurice Den, who owned the Den Arizona Mining Company, her name was Sujic, and she was the sister of Eva Sujic, who was Vaso Menegovich's wife. So it became difficult for Phelps Dodge to maintain the non-employment of South Slav miners. I think basically they just shrugged. And when the CNA and Shattuck Den, Den Arizona and Shattuck Arizona mining companies started employing Slavic miners, they just went along with it too. And then you started seeing large numbers of Slavs coming into Bisbee. And that bizarre idea of racism about what constitutes a white person, Slavs went from being considered non-white to being considered white. At the same time, when you're getting resistance from the dominant economic and political forces in Bisbee from being employed underground, the Serbs realized that they needed to have some kind of identification in the community. They also needed to retain their cultural and religious ties to the old country. So they established benevolent societies in Bisbee very early on. These benevolent societies served various purposes. One was to provide cheap insurance and burials. Another was to make sure that their children had religious education and also received cultural education, so they retained their Slavic identity. The other reason they did this was, of course, to have some kind of opportunity to fraternize, to have a way for them to keep in contact with other members of their ethnicity in Bisbee. They took part in marches and parades and all kinds of civic ceremonies, and they were very, very careful to make sure when they did that they displayed not only their own ethnic national flag, the Serbian flag, but also the American flag at that time. So they were very early on very conscious about maintaining their ethnic identity, but also to assure the rest of the community they were good patriotic Americans. And most of them that stayed after they were here for some time became naturalized citizens and became very active in the community. And Bisbee's Stefan Nemanja Lodge was established in 1905, and this is the membership of the lodge. And this is Mike Lazovich, Lefty Lazovich, and his dad right there. And these were some of the things that the lodges did. They provided an opportunity for people to engage in cultural events. So this is a play put on by younger members of the community with love the beards and mustaches, and tamburica music. So this was a string band that played music from the South Slav area, and by doing so, maintained their cultural identity. These are all kids born in the United States, and this continued on for many, many years, which is why the Soric brothers, Ted and Sam, could speak Serbian to each other, despite the fact that they weren't born in the Balkans. They learned some of the language and learned a lot of the customs. Cultural identity was passed on from one generation to the other. The deportation caused a large rift in the South Slav community. So some of the prominent businessmen, the Medigoviches, the Angises, the Prodanoviches, the Jovanoviches, were members of the vigilante organization. They were members of the Citizen Protective League. They were deputized to round up their own countrymen who were out on strike for the IWW in July 1917. So you see Serbs rounding up Serbs, Montenegrins rounding up Montenegrins, Croatians rounding up Croatians. And as the result of that was that there was a great deal of dissension and conflict in the South Slav communities for quite a number of years. And that was one of the reasons why the push to get a South Slavic church established in Bisbee, Serbian church, was put on hold for a while. The businessmen, the establishment Serbs, we include Montenegrins in that and Croatians in that, publicly said, we're loyal, patriotic supporters of the war, we're loyal, patriotic supporters of Bisbee and copper mining, and we condemn any action by our misguided brothers who were involved in the strike. And these were the Jovanovic brothers who owned the market on 120 Naco Road, and this business still exists. I think it's called Empress today, and it's one of the few remaining large buildings on Naco Road heading down to in the direction of Lowell that still exists. So Lee Jovanovic came over here and established the Miners Meat Market and Grocery, and he and his brother, Sam Jovanovic, and this is Lee right here, and Luke Jovanovic, not a brother, but a family member, ran this market in Bisbee along Naco Road until their death. So Lee died in 1944, and Sam also worked at this market with him. And one of the interesting things about South Slavs is that they did not marry, or they did not marry until, a lot of them, until they were fairly old. And you see other miners who get married at the age of 19, 20, early 20s. And Serbs and Montenegrins in particular tended not to marry until they were established in the community and were able to take care of a family. The Bujins also came in at an early age, and we have Chris Bujin, and this is him and his wife, Mamie Milutinovic, Mamie Bujin, and this is their wedding in 1925. Chris's brother John started a business on Naco Road, a little bit further down towards Lowell from the Jovanovic store, the miners market, and operated that business until his brother John decided he wanted to go back to what was then Yugoslavia and stayed back there. And Chris took over the business and ran it with his other brother until their death. And or until excuse me, not their death, until the Great Depression. And Chris and Mamie and their family ended up moving to Ajo, where there were still employment opportunities. Stayed there for the early years of the Depression, came back later on in the late 1930s. Chris went to work back at the mines. Mamie opened up a restaurant in Warren at the corner of Rupee and Arizona Street, where the Good to Go and Little Caesars is located right now. It's called Mamie's Cafe. And according to some ball players that I talked to who are very old, when I interviewed them, Mamie made the best chicken fried steak in the world. She was a pillar of the community. She was very, very active in the Serbian community in terms of the social life, and later was very active in St. Stefan Nemanja Church. The Bujan family ended up giving a building to Cochise College on the Sierra Vista campus, the Career and Technical Education Building. And George Bujan became a successful miner in Peru, made a lot of money. His brother Sam worked for Phelps Dodge for many, many years. And the Bujans gave over $1 million to the college in order for them to build a career and technical education center. So, passing on the legacy. The Prodanoviches also owned, and I'm sure you've noticed there's kind of a pattern to the people that I'm talking about here. These were store owners, and a number of South Slavs went to work in the mines. There were a lot of others that realized very early on working in the mines is not going to get you much in the way of a secure economic future, and it's certainly not going to get you social advancement. So the Prodanovich brothers decided early on that they were going to become store owners. And there were two Prodanovich brothers. This is Pete Prodanovich right here. And he's a witness at the wedding of Achim Bujan. This is Chris Bujan's brother and his wife, Milica Andrich. And this is Chris Bujan right there, also a member of the wedding party. So again, you see family relationships that are being connected, which provides an opportunity for people to pool their resources, both financial and human. This is where the depot market that Pete Prodanovich owned was right here, close to the corner of OK Street and Naco Road, right across from where the old railroad depot was. Hence, it was called the Depot Market. So Pete owned that and operated that for many years. His brother Chris also worked at the Depot Market, and they were there until their retirement and remained in Bisbee. Sam Belich was another business operator. He was born in Purtleville, and he came here. Steve and Milica Belich were his parents. They remained in Douglas for a while, but he apprenticed at a bakery in Douglas and moved here in 1927 and joined Dusan Dan Komnenich in operating the Arizona Baking Company. And this was the original Phelps Dodge Mercantile in Lowell that was later leased to Balich family and the Komneniches and became the Arizona Baking Company, a very successful bakery. And Sam married Nadi Porovich, who we'll run into a little bit later, in 1936. And he and Dan Komnenich operated this bakery for many, many years. Sam became a Cochise County supervisor in 1968. Dan was born in Montenegro, and he married Jenny Balich. So again, you see the intermarriage among the families. And this cements the relationships and enables people to maximize their economic and human resource potential, because you can have family members that work in your business. And both these men were very active in establishing St. Stefan Nemanja Church in Bakerville. There, Sam and Nadi's son became a all-star athlete in Bisbee and later rose through the ranks at Phelps Dodge and went all the way up to becoming corporate vice president in 1987. And he and his dad were both very active in planning the night in Belgrade, the annual event, fundraising event for the church that later just became a cultural event that was widely attended by folks outside the South Slav community. So Nick moved to Phoenix, became a senior executive for PD. So you see social mobility among the South Slavic families. Their kids went to college, their kids became very successful. The Pinteks are a Croatian family that moved here from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Mike Pintek contracted tuberculosis while he was in the UP. And the climate in northern Michigan is not conducive to long survival for people with tuberculosis. So he first moved to Texas, where they hoped to find some sort of successful treatment, and then moved to Bisbee. He couldn't work in the mine, so he worked as a shoe repairman, drove a cab, and operated a small store with his wife in South Bisbee. And they had two sons, Mike and John. And both of these folks were very socially progressive, which when I found out how the Pinteks had always stood up for organized labor and other things on the liberal side of the political spectrum, it made it pretty easy to understand why he would be added, although he wasn't a miner and wasn't on strike. He was added to the list of people to round up during the Bisbee deportation. So when the deportation started, they came and got Mike Pintek, tried to put him on the train. He was pulled out of the line by a friend who realized this trip to Columbus, New Mexico is going to kill him. He went across the line to hide out because he was afraid he'd be killed by the vigilantes. Later came back, and he remained in Bisbee until he died of tuberculosis in 1921. And Katie became the sole breadwinner in the family. She's an amazing woman. Both of these people were very strong-minded and also believed in social justice and the rights of working people. She provided for her family. Mike had signed on to the IWW's class action lawsuit that was launched in 1919 and 1918, and they got some kind of financial award from the people that were sued, the vigilantes and the companies that took part in planning and carrying out the deportation. So they used that money to buy a store and hotel in Bakerville. And this is the Pintek store and hotel. And it's still there. I believe now it's owned by John Charlie and his wife, Peggy Avina. Katie became a very, very staunch advocate for women's rights and feminist issues. And she was a supporter of Margaret Sanger. When I found this out, it's like, whoa, this lady was far ahead of her time. And she was known for being a friend to people who were down and out during the Depression, would extend them credit. And she was always willing to speak her mind. The world could probably use a few thousand, and America could probably use a few thousand people like Katie Pintek today. She was never afraid to speak her mind, to stand up to authority figures and people who didn't appreciate her beliefs and value systems. A strong woman. Her son, John, was a strong believer in social justice and legal system, and I think I can pretty much guess who he got his values from. And he was born in Bisbee, attended the University of Arizona. He was a very good friend and drinking buddy with Ted DeGrazia while he was at the university, and after DeGrazia moved down to Bisbee in 1936. He got his law degree, and in 1940 ran as a Democrat for Cochise County Attorney, became the youngest person ever to hold that office. served in the Counterintelligence Corps, married Clara Edwards, served 2 terms in the Arizona State Senate. Again, just like his mom, strong advocate for human rights and social justice. He was a burr under the saddle for Phelps Dodge until his death, and he was very, very active in trying to get a monument for James Brew, the miner who was killed during the deportation on July 12th in Upper Lowell, placed in front of Warren Ballpark. The monument instead is now at the Evergreen Cemetery. John was a fierce advocate for human rights, social justice, and John had the ranch, the Pintec Ranch, which is down close to um, Highway 90 and 80 intersection, down on the other side of the divide. Mike Pintec, who was his brother, became a civil engineer and worked for the state highway department for many, many years. So both of the Pintec brothers became well educated and had successful careers. Of course, John's son, John Pintec Jr., was the last Democrat to be elected as Cochise County Sheriff. The Porovich family, and this is Bozo Porovich and his wife. This is their children. This is Nadi Porovich and Radi Porovich. And Nadia or Nadi Porovich became the wife of, again, Sam Balich, who owned the co-owner of the Arizona Baking Company. And Radi would later become work for his dad at first, and then start his own business. So these folks were very, very ambitious, frugal, hardworking people. And this is the store that Bozo Porovich started, and that was the American Cash Grocery Store in Bakerville. It's right across the street from Dairy Queen and the thrift store. Later on, he also purchased real estate. So these people worked hard, saved money, did everything that they could to advance their lot in life. And they lived on Pirung Street in Bakerville, right next to where the hitching post is today. In 1951, Roddy started the hitching post, and it was known as Roddy's Hitching Post and remained part of the hitching post, or he remained owner for quite some time. And the Porovich family was very successful. They also owned real estate in Phoenix. They did quite well for themselves over a period of time. And Vukasav Lazovic was from Montenegro, and we saw his picture earlier with his son, Mike Lefty Lazovic. And Vukasav was married twice. His first wife was Agnes Tilka Lazovic, and this is her right here. And they had a number of children. Agnes died in the 1918 flu pandemic. And so Vukasav was left with a passel of kids. And what he ended up doing was remarrying. And this is his second wife, Malicha, and their children. So what we have here is for the first Lazovic family, this became sort of a Brady Bunch on steroids, blended family. So we had Frank, who was actually Agnes's first marriage, and just came into the family, treated like a brother. Stossel, and he went by Joe. Helen Lazovic, Mary Lazovic, John Lazovic, Rosie Lazovic, Ann Lazovic, and then a stillborn son, James Lazovic. So there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 Lazoviches in this family. And then after Vukasav married Malicha, Bulach, they had Mike Lazovic was their firstborn, followed by Olga Lazovic, Roy Lazovic, Ruby Lazovic, Zorka Lazovic, and George Lazovic. So a pretty big family. Several of the Lazoviches remained in the area, and Mike was probably the most notable. And we all know him as Lefty, of course. And he was employed by Shattuck Dam Mining Company, served in the Army. His first wife was Hilda. They had two kids, Mike and Pat. And then he married Barbara Dyer in 1978. And he worked for Phelps Dodge until his retirement, very active in politics. He served as a city councilman and two terms of mayor, as mayor of Bisbee. And he was a lifelong member of, or after St. Stephen Nemanja Church was established, he was a lifelong member after that. Lefty did one thing that really impressed me was when the country club down in Naco refused to admit Angel Salas into the country club as a member because he was Hispanic. Lefty stood up to them and told them they had agreed to pay $1 a year to the city of Bisbee for the country club and had never done that. And if they didn't admit Angel Salas into the country club, he was going to call in the bad debt, and that would be the end of the country club. And country club membership, or the organizers of the country club, the officers decided to relent, and Angel got in. So Lefty was a stand-up guy. We can all remember Olga Lazovich, who was very, very active in carrying the torch as far as Bisbee High School history, lived in Warren. And we all also know Darlene Martin, his granddaughter, who we all know as Punky Martin, lived in Phoenix and has since come back to Bisbee. And Punky was very, very helpful in assisting me in gathering information about South Slavic history in Bisbee. Thank you, Punky. The Severoviches were also a very prominent family in Bisbee, and the first Severovich here was Danilo, who came from Montenegro. So, although a lot of the South Slavs here, all of them were known as, except for the Croatians, as Serbs, a lot of them were actually from Montenegro. So he went to work for the CNA. He was very active in establishing the Stefan Nemanja Lodge in Warren in 1905. He moved his family back to Yugoslavia in 1921, and there could have been several reasons for that. One might have been homesickness, and the other was that the economy tanked in Cochise County after World War I ended, and there weren't any jobs. Danilo never returned to the United States, and his wife stayed in Yugoslavia. Their son, Ted, who was born in Cochise County, did come back here. And in 1929, he was sponsored by Panto Milovic, who went into partnership with him and others in opening the White House Cafe in Lowell. And those of you who lived in Bisbee long enough to remember where the White House Cafe was, it was between the Arizona Baking Company and where the Lowell Theater was, or is. And he married Olga Nikolic, and they had 3 children, Catherine, Anna, and John. And they stayed in Bisbee until 1977. And then they moved to Phoenix. And Ted and their son John and daughter Catherine went to Yugoslavia in 1961, where they reunited with his mother Kate, who he hadn't seen for 32 years. This is the White House Cafe, and this is Tisimir Ted Severovich, John Severovich's dad. And we all know John and love John Severovich, who was a great athlete at Bisbee High School, who went to the University of Arizona and got a degree in civil engineering, and then started his own company, which became a very successful contractor. John Severovich has also been very, very active in maintaining St. Stephen Nemanja Church in Bakerville. John was also very, very helpful in assisting me in understanding the history of the South Slav community in Bisbee. So thank you, John, and thank you for taking care of that wonderful old church. So Ted's partner in the White House Cafe was Panto Milovic, who served in the Army and during World War I, got his citizenship, And he started working as a driver for the Superior Baking Company in Lowell. After World War I, he returned to Bisbee. He married one of the Baliches. And again, you can see these interrelationships between families, which certainly helped in terms of maintaining um, economic, uh, good economic situations because you can pool your resources, you can also pool your help. And the Miloviches had a number of children. He remained as the owner of White House Cafe into the 60s, also operated, and I didn't know that before, the Warren Hotel. So they were also very active in the church, St. Stephen, Nemanja. Spaso Steve Benderak and his wife Petra operated the Park Cash store, which was on the corner of Taylor and Opera Drive. It's one of the coolest commercial businesses or commercial buildings in Bisbee because it is a two-story building. It has an entrance on both floors because it's on such a steep incline. And the Benderaks had two kids, Bill and Lee. They operated the store until Steve died in 1935, and then Petra took it over and operated it into the 50s. Their sons, Lee and Bill, worked in the store, so they got an idea of how to run a grocery store. And this is Lee and Bill. That's Lee and Bill. And both of them served in the military during World War II. They operated the Midtown Market at the corner of Arizona Street and Condon for many years. And the store was a interesting place because it was rather untidy and most of their business was liquor. So it was a liquor store that was kind of a grocery store as well. Neither brother married, and they were both very active in St. Stephen, Nemanja. One of their uncles was Marco Benderak, who was deported. He was the brother of Spaso, came back here to Bisbee and opened up the coffee market, which was the first coffee house. So he's Bisbee's first barista. In the Johnson edition, moved it over in 1946 to Warren. And he sold the business to Lee in 1951, and he died in 55. His obituary in the Bisbee Daily Review said he left Bisbee for a short time in 1917, but returned later. Actually, he was deported from Bisbee. Oh, the other thing that he did that was really cool was that during the Depression, he donated lots of food and coffee and other staples from his market, his bodega, to people in Bisbee that were in need. Lou Pavlovich, Croatians, and Nelly Militic Pavlovich first went to Los Angeles from Croatia and moved to Bisbee. And he worked in restaurants in Lowell and Bisbee, and the family returned to Los Angeles when things tanked here during the Depression. But he came back. They had 8 children, and we're going to take a look at what some of those children did. So the Pavloviches worked in restaurant business, and some of their children went on to do some pretty interesting things. Nick Pavlovich went to Bisbee High School, served in World War II, was on Guam and helped relay the surrender ceremonies back to San Francisco from Tokyo in 1945. He married Bonnie Morris, and when he married Bonnie, he married into the Morris family. His father-in-law was connected with KSUN Radio and then later the Bisbee cable television. And Nick was a pioneer as far as cable TV was concerned. He figured out very early on, after the first geosynchronous communication satellites were launched, that they could bounce signals from one place in the United States to another place in the United States and connect using satellites, connect television. So Bisbee was the first small town in the United States to have modern cable television. They had KTLA in Los Angeles, WGN in Chicago, the Turner stations in Atlanta, and in 1978, and a brand new cable service called Home Box Office. So Tucson had 5 television stations in 1978. Bisbee had 10. Nick was a pioneer in cable TV. He also helped establish the Bisbee World War II memorial that overlooks the Lavender Pit. And Nick is buried at the entrance of Evergreen Cemetery. He's sort of Evergreen's official greeter. Nick was quite a character and a wonderful man. His brother Lou um, became the sports editor for the Bisbee Daily Review when the sports editor quit, and he just walked into the job. And so even before he graduated from high school, he was sports editor. He was an old school journalist and a very good one. After he got out of the Army, he came back and got a job or enrolled at the University of Arizona. He was a sports editor for the campus newspaper, the Wildcat. That's Lou right there. And he was working as a sports writer for the Star, the Arizona Daily Star in Tucson, even before he graduated. He was very ambitious. He became a sports writer for the Star. He became sports writer and editor for the sports editor for the Tucson Daily Citizen. He was my ultimate boss when I was a sports stringer for the Citizen back in the early 70s. He won all kinds of awards for his work. He also was very, very active in establishing codes of ethics and conduct for good sportsmanship among athletes. The Goykoviches came to Bisbee, settled in Sulphur Spring Valley over by McNeil, and had a large family, but they also had a large ranch, and they raised produce and livestock to sell in Bisbee. And they moved back to Bakerville and later moved to California. Several families, by the way, owned large ranches and farms out in Sulphur Springs Valley, South Slavs, and also in the Bowie area. And Tom Goykovich, Sam Sorovich, came to Bisbee from Serbia, and he was working for the CNA. He was deported in 1917. He never told his family. Nobody talked about the deportation. So this is Sam and his wife, and Jenny Vukarovich. He got his citizenship. Sam was drafted, served in combat in World War I in France, got his citizenship at Camp Kearney, California. Worked after he came back, worked as a store clerk for the Buchans, and then he worked for Phelps Dodge for the rest of his life. And he married Jenny in 1935, and the Soriches had 3 children, Sam Jr., Ted, and Annette. And the Sorich family provided me with a number of photographs, including some of which Sam had hair. But this is the one I think that best exemplifies his personality and nature. So he became a part-time employee for PD even while he was going to Bisbee High School, and worked in part-time jobs, and graduated from high school, became a full-time employee with PD, started as janitor, worked his way up to human resources and safety director, worked in Douglas for a number of years, married Opal Noble, who was a school teacher, and the Soriches lived in Douglas and Bisbee, and they had 2 children, Debbie and Cindy. Sam was active in so many different things. Sam was probably, if I was going to choose the person who would be the best representative of the goodness and decency of Bisbee, Cochise County, Arizona, America, I would put Sam Sorich first in line. He was such a generous, kind, decent, hardworking, caring human being and it was all genuine. He's a wonderful man. He was also active in so many different community organizations, but very, very active in St. Stephen, Nemanja, and Warren community churches. I love Sam Sorich, and I think everybody who knew Sam loved him too. Interesting fact, I went to the Pima County Sheriff's Department Academy with his mother, who must have been in her late 50s at the time, in 1976 in Tucson. His mom, Jenny, worked for the Cochise County Sheriff's Department, and they sent her through the academy in Pima County. Sam's brother, Ted, was an all-sport star athlete in Bisbee. So track, baseball, football, basketball. And he was probably the finest athlete to come out of Bisbee. And I know a lot of people would say Hadley Hicks was. My nominee is Ted Sorich. And he quarterbacked Bisbee to 2 undefeated seasons in football, and also quarterbacked what is now the Northern Arizona University Lumberjacks to the first bowl game and national championship that any four-year school in Arizona um, played in or um, participated in. And Ted became a high school administrator and athletic director at Floyd Mills High School. He's still alive and lives in Oro Valley. He is the only person, I believe, in Bisbee or from Bisbee still alive whose dad was born in the 1800s, and that's Sam Sorich Sr. The Kasuns came from Croatia. They first went to the Upper Peninsula, as a lot of Croatians did, and moved here and worked as a copper miner for PD. So they've moved to Cowan Ridge and then to Warren, and they had 4 kids. And Phelps Dodge praised Sam for being an extremely careful and meticulous miner and operating the pneumatic drill underground safely. His son Bob was city councilman, lifelong Bisbee resident, World War II veteran, and came back here and lived in Warren, married Millie Millie Kasoon, and they had 2 kids. Bob was appointed to the city council in '74 and elected a number of times. He was facing a recall election. This is I'm surprised this didn't make David Letterman. I know it made national news. Um, he faced a recall election in March 2006 and died before the election. And he was running against Jeff Harris. Despite his death, he won by a 3-1 majority. He was reelected at city council. Of course, they had to have a special election or had to appoint someone in his place after his death. But it is a tribute to Bob's qualities as a human being that he was elected by a landslide after his death. He's also a very dedicated volunteer at the Mining Historical Museum. His brother was a war hero, was drafted in the Army while he was at Arizona State College in Flagstaff, and was recommended for the Medal of Honor. Didn't get it, but he was quite a war hero. Was a professional military man, stayed in the Army, retired as lieutenant colonel in 1963. So we see South Slavs rising to careers in business, rising careers in military, and just doing very, very well, law and other careers. Steve Lovich came to Bisbee at age 13, working as a dishwasher at the Copper Queen. He operated the new Edelweiss and Grand restaurants in Lowell. And he married Rosa Marsich Murphy, and they had one son, Dushan. And they had also Rosa's daughters from an early marriage. And they spent their final years living in Warren. And this is Steve. Their son, Dushan, went to Bisbee High School, attended the U of A, inducted in the Army, trained as a medic, enrolled in the Army Specialized Training Program. Very, very intelligent man, learned Russian. And he married Eleanor Cruz, who was a nurse. They had 3 kids, Jim, Ellen, and Steve. He returned to the university after the war, got his bachelor's and then his law degree in 1953, served as an attorney, and worked in the Juvenile Prosecutors Division of the Cochise County Attorney. Their son, Jim Vlavich, of course, went to Annapolis, became a Marine officer, returned to Bisbee, became county planning and zoning director, and then county administrator. So a lot of upward mobility and a lot of people from South Slavic community who are achieving pretty high stature in the community. And some of them made excellent athletes. Besides Ted Sorich, we have Annie Mihelich, who later married Bob Henry, who was a star softball player for teams in Bisbee and Tucson, and was later, of course, signed by the Rockford Peaches. That's her playing for the Peaches, All-American Girls Professional Baseball League, and also a star player with the legendary Copper Queens. Pete Bukharovich, um, Bob Bukharovich's son, who both he and his brother Danny became star athletes. Pete made it to the high minor leagues and was a star pitcher for the U.S. Navy during the Korean War. And he threw out the first pitch during Warren Ballpark Centennial in 2009. The South Slavs did not have their own church. Of course, the Croatians, being Catholic, went to uh, St. Patrick's, but the Montenegrins and the Serbs didn't have their own church until 1939 when the parish hall was built. There were services that were held there, and the parish hall is wonderful. But in the early 1950s, they decided to build their own church, and this is St. Stefan Nemanja, which the construction was started in 1952 and was completed in 1954. So this is in Bakerville, and if you haven't ever seen this church, I would strongly recommend that you go by. It is a national landmark. It's a beautiful church and the beautiful parish hall. And to fund the church construction, and this was done without a mortgage. They did this with sweat equity and building as they went. So, in order to help finance the church, they established a fundraising event every year called a Night in Belgrade, which was a celebration of South Slavic culture, of Serbian and Montenegrin culture, with dancing, music, food, and all kinds of good things. And they brought people in, entertainers from Phoenix and from the West Coast to help with this event. And it became a major Bisbee tourist attraction and lasted until 1980. St. Stephen opened its doors in 1954. If you'll notice, dump number 7 is not there yet. So this is the dedication of the church in 1954. And these were the members of the first community congregation at St. Stephen. Now, there's been a huge, huge controversy over the last few years about immigrants being a threat to Americans. They're going to poison our blood, and they're criminals and rapists and all these terrible things. And what we've seen here is a whole bunch of immigrants who came to this country, came to Bisbee, and made good, and their children made good as well. And here's my favorite. This guy is not just a stand-up guy, but he's also one of the toughest people I've ever heard of. Gliso Chukovic, who worked in bakery in Lowell and was a driver and was drafted in World War I in the Merce Argonne Forest, shot twice in the leg, had his gas mask hose severed. So he was gassed and shot, spent many, many months in VA and Army hospitals after World War I, recovered, went to work as a carpenter in Bisbee after he got out of the hospital and returned. Gliso reenlisted in 1942 at age 54, which is an astounding thing, and demanded to be sent to Yugoslavia and where he could kill Germans. Now, the Army Air Force instead sent him to Foggia, Italy, where he used his skills as a carpenter to help build Air Force facilities. And this is a picture of him. His story made national news. The idea of a man at age 54, a war hero from World War I, volunteering to go to Europe and fight. He came back home and was instrumental in developing the St. Stephen Nemanja Church, was very, very active in cultural activities and remained that way. So I think if you're looking for any example of what an immigrant can do for his adopted country, I would say Gliso Chukovic is a very, very good example. So this is my presentation, and all I have to say is that it's pretty obvious from the examples that we've seen that the South Slavic community, whether it's Serbs, Montenegrins, or Croatians, made tremendous contributions to Bisbee, to Cochise County, to Arizona, to the United States. And they are great examples of what immigrants and their descendants can do. There are very few of them living here now because when the mine shut down, those that were still here left for greater opportunities. They were socially mobile and sought work and economic opportunities wherever they could find them. But we remember them and we hope to keep their legacy alive for as long as there's a Bisbee. Thank you.
Indeed, Mike. Thank you so much. That's fantastic. And it was wonderful learning the history behind so many familiar families within our community.
Yep. Itches and vitches.
All right. So we do have questions for you.
Great.
Gary has asked, what year was the picture taken in the very first slide that you presented? And what was the source? And do you know if any of the people have been identified?
No, I don't know the source. It was in the archives of the Mining Historical Museum. I can't tell you the year it was taken. Have no idea. From the looks of it, I would say either around World War One or shortly thereafter. And there were no people identified in the photo. So sorry to say, Gary, can't help you. If I could, I would.
And you just mentioned the mining museum and our research library. Would you talk about the resources that we have available at the museum? This is just a question for me. If you could share with our audience what we have available in the event they would like to do some of their own family research.
I'd be delighted, or any kind of research, whether it's family research or into any aspect of life in Bisbee. The Bisbee Mining Historical Museum has got an incredible resource in the research library, the Lem Shattuck Research Library. It has many thousands of photographs. It has newspaper on microfilm. It has city directories. It has books on Bisbee, mining, and anything that's connected to Bisbee in the mining industry. It has high school yearbooks. It has an city, I believe I already mentioned city directories, but it's just an incredible resource. So if you want to know where an ancestor lived, and I helped somebody with that just yesterday in research library. If you want to know what somebody did in high school, if you're interested in researching any particular aspect of Bisbee history, it's a great place. I would also like to recommend to anybody out there who has historic photographs, who would like to help us to um, maintain the history of Bisbee, our wonderful community, to donate those to be digitized so that we can add them to our collection. And I know there's about 17,000 hard copies, but there are many more digitized photographs now that are in our collection. It is an amazing collection. I love browsing through it. I see things that just pique my interest every time I go through and learn new things. So if you're interested in learning history or if you're interested in volunteering, I'd recommend you come down and work in the gift shop, to work at the front, greeting people and taking um, money for entrance fees. If you want to work as a research library docent, there's plenty of opportunities for that. The Mining Historical Museum, all of it, but especially the research library, incredible resource for researching Bisbee history.
Thank you, Mike. It is a wonderful library. When I was going to college, I volunteered in the library and did research there many hours, countless hours.
Yeah, and it's so much fun.
Another question from Gary. You had mentioned a statue or a monument, rather, that was originally planned for the ballpark, which is now an evergreen cemetery that commemorated the 1917 deportation.
Yep.
And would you please provide some more information on that?
Yeah, there was a um, movement to have that placed in front of the ballpark, and it was taken in front of the city council. There were some rather contentious comments made, some of which I would say, in uh, my own personal opinion, were inflammatory and just not appropriate for the moment. And I'm sure there are people out there that would know what I'm talking about. The monument, instead of being placed at the um, ballpark, was put in the cemetery, which it gets quite a bit of visitation there as well. And the monument was for James Brew, and it was about James Brew, who, by the way, was not on the list to be deported. Just some overzealous vigilantes violating due process, and who probably would have been shot justifiably for a home invasion um, under the stand your ground laws of Arizona today. Went up to the boarding house in Jiggerville and approached Brew. And what happened was very unclear until recently. The Cochise County Sheriff's Department said that um, Orson McCrae, who was the leader of the vigilante squad that went up and a shift boss for the Calumet Arizona Mining Company, was shot by friendly fire. In other words, he was shot by his own deputies. That was very recently taken off their website. The testimony during the coroner's inquest looked suspiciously like that may have actually been the case. These were untrained men. They were not police officers, with very rare exception. Um, I think it would be specious to call James Brew a cop killer. I think it would be very, very hard to justify such a statement. And so that's my take. That's my opinion. And I know there are other opinions out there, but that was the story behind that. And John Pintek was one of the folks who was behind placing it in front of Warren Ballpark.
All right. We have just a few comments. One of our guests lives next door to the Dabovich family and was always curious about their history. Another one of our guests said they remember eating at the White House in Lowell. And John also said that he remembers his parents going to the Knights of Belgrade at the Serbian church in the
Yeah, and
60s.
the Dabovich family goes way, way back. Chris Dabovich um, and his family, miners in Bisbee very early on, lived up on Chihuahua Hill. And their grandson actually worked for me as sports editor at the Daily Dispatch. So there's still Daboviches in Cochise County, and they've intermarried into other families, just like a lot of the South Slav communities did. But they are definitely still here, and you can. What I did today, and this is just a slice of the South Slavic community. I couldn't get in. There are many that I did not get an opportunity to talk about in detail. The Vakarovich family, the Dabovich family. We could go on. As a matter of fact, I've got a whole bunch of files here of people that I've done research on and just did not have the opportunity. Time limits just prevent us from being able to take it any further than we did. But I believe that there were about 20% of Bisbee's population at one time was South Slavic. That's, I think, about a fairly reasonable estimate of the importance in terms of demographics, the importance of contributions to the community. It's pretty incredible.
Speaking of all that research that you did and weren't able to mention everyone, Chris, or possibly his other half, Carrie, has asked. They're interested to know if you might know the origin of their great grandma in law. Oh, so it was Chris. Sorry, Stephanie, also known as Sally Megadovich. She was married to Harold Gaethje of Warren and lived there for many years. And they're hoping to visit the Balkans and to specifically the area where their family originated from.
Yeah, Mitch, there were several different Medigovich families here. And one thing that I ran into yesterday, for example, when I was going to the olive oil um, vendor in the Medigovich building in in Brewery Gulch, was that I don't think he understood, and I understandably so, that just because you have the same last name doesn't mean that you're a member of that immediate family. So um, the Gaethje family, I believe, was related to Mitch Medigovich, who is one of the Medigoviches who was deported from Bisbee in 1917 and ended up living most of his life after he in California after um, came back briefly and then left again. Got some demographic information on that, and but it wasn't the same Medigovich's direct line as Vaso Medigovich in that family.
Well, Mike, thank you so much for yet again another fantastic presentation. We truly appreciate your time and your expertise in bringing these stories to our audience.
And I thank you very much for everybody that listened in today. And I would urge anyone that has the inclination, who loves history, and I know there's a lot of people out there that do, to become part of the family of the Bisbee Mining and Historical Museum. Because when you do, you'll find out that you can make a contribution. You can learn a lot more about Bisbee's wonderful history, but you can also make a contribution to explaining to visitors and local residents of the importance of understanding our complex, rich, and fascinating history. It
Indeed.
ain't pretty. And I just like to say, it's not always beautiful, it's not always clean, um, but it's fascinating to study, and it explains to a great extent why we are who we are today.
Indeed, Mike. And there are various ways to support the museum, whether it be an outright donation or volunteering your time. And we appreciate you mentioning that. And once again, thank you, Mike, and thank you to our audience for joining us. We hope to see you again for our next online program on Saturday, December 13th. Take care, everyone. Bye.
All right.